But first of all, let's now speak to Shadow Minister without portfolio, Nick Thomas-Symonds, the Labour MP for Torfaen. Nice to see you, Nick. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. We're going to allow you to have a good old crow about the by-election results in just a minute. But can we just look forward again to Rochdale next week? Because you were dragged onto the airwaves to defend Azhar Ali last week. And I'm wondering whether you regret that now, considering what we now know. I mean, I can't really understand why you felt you could defend him when he had said the indefensible about Israel. But do you now regret it?
Well, look, I couldn't have and didn't know what subsequently came out later that day. But
wasn't what he said enough to condemn him?
Well, what he said was appalling, and I made that absolutely clear when I was speaking about this on Monday. But what I and we had listened to were hugely respected, prominent people in the Jewish community who spoke about the history that candidate, former candidate, now had in actually standing beside people against anti-Semitic attacks, and had also given what appeared to be a genuine full apology and a recognition of rebuilding bridges. But the assessment that we were given that this was out of character, as soon as it became clear that there was another incident, this wasn't out of character, then clearly the very difficult decision had to be taken. And I say difficult, Camilla, because it's a huge decision to have a by-election with no supported Labour candidate, which is what we have. But
well, I know, but you didn't do your due diligence on vetting him, did you? I mean, most people saw the situation last week. I spoke to Pat McFadden, a colleague of yours, is a very straight-talking, sort of no-nonsense type of politician. He's there defending this guy. Everyone else is watching and listening to the programme thinking, how could you even... He should have been sacked immediately. He was basically peddling sort of conspiracy theories that the Israelis brought the October the 7th attack on themselves so that they could attack Gaza. I mean, it's the stuff of sort of Twitter lunacy.
It's appalling, and I made that clear, as did Pat McFadden last week. It was the point that we were told this was something that was out of character. As soon as it became clear there was another incident, the decision had to be taken. But Camilla, this was a decision taken over 48 hours. We're talking about a matter of hours here. That decision has firmly been taken. And there is no doubt that there is a real change that's been led by Keir Starmer dealing with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And it's not just taking my word for it. That's what the EHRC has said by taking the Labour Party out of special measures last year in recognition of the changes Keir Starmer has made to our systems.
Although you're not all singing from the same hymn sheet, are you? Because we understand that the SNP has tabled a motion calling for a ceasefire. They want to call for a second vote in the House of Commons. On one hand, we've got Keir Starmer resisting that. And on the other, we now have Scottish Labour saying that they support the motion. They think it's perfectly reasonable. So actually, Labour is split on a ceasefire.
We're completely united about seeing an end to the fighting.
But you're not united on a ceasefire, are you?
Well, we all want to get to a ceasefire. What we are saying...
Will you vote for one then?
Well, look, we will need to look at the wording of the motion that is actually laid before Parliament.
Have you not seen the motion? It's already out.
Well, we need to see what the laid motion is. You see various things going around on social media. Let's see it formally laid down, actually what the final wording is. And let me just explain the position that we take on this, because we all want to see an end to the fighting. But we want to build a sustainable ceasefire that is going to last. And what that means is an end to the fighting on both sides, so rockets coming out of Gaza as well as going into Gaza. It means releasing the hostages, absolutely vital. It means getting that humanitarian aid into Gaza that is desperately needed. But it also means trying to put steps into place to move towards a two-state solution, which the international community has put in the too difficult box for too long. These are the steps that we actually need to take to get to that sustainable ceasefire.
OK, I mean, you used to be a former Shadow Home Secretary, so you'll have an insight into Sir Keir Starmer's thinking when it comes to talking about our own national security. What's he saying, however, when he's at the Munich Security Conference yesterday, talking about standing up for allies in NATO? OK, that speaks for itself. But then warning against divide and threatening behaviour. Is he referring to Donald Trump there? I mean, does he not agree with Donald Trump that our European neighbours should be honouring their 2% defence spending commitments?
Well, look, certainly people need to be honouring their defence commitments, but I agree with what the NATO Secretary General has said about this, and indeed Keir has said around the idea of inviting or pressing Russia to attack NATO allies. That clearly isn't in line with Article 5, and anything that undermines Article 5, the idea that we all stand together, is obviously not helpful. But at the same time, Camilla, I would say that it is a matter for the American people who they choose to elect as their president in November. Whoever is elected as the president, if there is to be a Labour government, and we are privileged to serve, we will work with whoever that president is. Because, frankly, the special relationship with the United States, it's between people. It doesn't depend upon who the president and prime minister is at any given time.
What do you think of Donald Trump?
I think that's for the American people.
No, everyone can have an opinion. What's your opinion?
Well, I don't. On that particular issue that you've asked me around about NATO, I've said that I think trying to undermine the alliance is the wrong thing to do. Broadly speaking, it's a matter for the American people what their view is. It's for them.
I know, but you must have a view. You might need to be working up close and personal with President Trump and his administration. So what do you think of him as a world leader?
Well, look, our sister party is obviously the Democrats. But let me just say, I was actually in Washington, Camilla, back last year. I was back in Washington in July. What I've always done, what David Lammy always does, what Keir Starmer always does, is you meet people on both sides of the political divide. I was in Congress, for example, last July. I was speaking to Democrats. I was speaking to Republicans as well. And what I always say, and I've said it directly to them, by the way, not just on your show, whoever they choose to select as their presidential candidate and whoever becomes the president is a matter for them. Of course, you can have historical debates about who've been good presidents, bad presidents, and all the rest of it, but that's for the future. What we have to focus on here is the national interest, and the national interest is in working with whoever the American president is after, it'll be January, of course, if there's to be a new president.
Well, on the national interest, Keir Starmer has recorded a shiny new video this morning in which he talks about defence and security being Labour's number one priority. But it's not the number one priority of Labour voters, is it? According to Ipsos Mori, more important to Labour voters are the following topics: health, inflation, economy, education, housing. So why is something Labour's number one priority that isn't actually Labour voters' number one priority?
Well, because all the things that you've just described can only be achieved if fundamentally you are keeping the country safe. So it's, if you like, what you do as the bedrock upon which all those other things are built. So, keeping the country safe is always the government's number one priority, has to be a government's number one priority. And that gives you then the security. You have to build economic stability upon that, which, of course, this government has noticeably failed to do in recent years. That then is the stability that allows you to grow the economy, to give people the public services that they rightly demand.
Some of the coverage of the by-election results are quite interesting this morning. I mean, it's not sort of undiluted praise for Sir Keir Starmer. We've got David Blunkett writing in the Mail on Sunday, warning the Labour leader not to be complacent. We've got a two-page spread in The Observer, which, let's face it, is no fan of the Tory party, again saying that Labour mustn't be complacent. It's not quite the victory that you're making out, is it? Because it's not really a ringing endorsement for Keir Starmer. It's more a non-endorsement for the Tory government, isn't it? It's about Tory voters staying at home, but they're not flocking to you.
Well, I think in by-elections, I mean, the two turnouts here are about 37%, I think, in Kingswood, 38% in Wellingborough. But when you see lower turnout, it tends to have been across all areas of voters. So I don't think it's fair to assume that exclusively all the votes who stayed at home are Conservative, because the evidence wouldn't suggest that's the case. But these are
So you're saying Labour voters also stayed at home? That's hardly a ringing endorsement of Starmer, is it?
Well, no. This has just been the tradition of by-elections for a number of decades now. 37%.
Well, Tony Blair got people out, didn't he?
If you look at turnouts in by-elections, it was lower than in general elections. And interestingly, you're talking about Tony Blair 1995, 96, 97. The point that you've just put to me about it being a verdict on the government but not enthusiastic about Labour was said at the same time in the 1990s. It's not an uncommon argument that's been put. But let me just say this. I was out in Kingswood. That was the place I went there. I visited 3 times in the last 7 days of the campaign. And the candidate there, Damien Egan, now, of course, the Member of Parliament, was campaigning very strongly on our positive offer on the National Health Service, around things like the 2 million new appointments, 700,000 urgent dental appointments, doubling the number of scanners. That positive offer was going down extremely well on the doorstep. So that was very, very important to our campaigns. But it's also the case that people will only put their trust in you if they trust you with the economy and they trust you with the topic we were discussing a moment or two ago, national security. And they are very significant changes. And that's why across the elections, we've seen such large swings. I think it was over 16% in Kingswood, over 28% in Wellingborough. They are huge swings historically to having by-elections to the party.
Nick Thomas-Symonds, we need to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Thank you. Now, as we referenced the Rochdale Labour by-election candidate Azhar Ali, here are the other listed candidates for the upcoming by-election. I'm going to whiz through them very quickly. Azhar Ali was Labour Party, is now independent. Mark Coleman is the independent. Simon Danshut, remember him, he's for Reform UK. Ian Donaldson is the Liberal Democrat. Paul Ellison is the Conservative. George Galloway, again a blast from the past, Workers' Party of Britain. Michael Howarth, independent. William Howarth, independent. Guy Otten, Green Party. Raven Rodent Subaltner, official monster raving loony. And David Tully, the independent.